Yo, first video of the new year, and it's about Saryn. And for those who say I have a problem, you shut your damn mouth. This video is not a build video, but something we've got to address about how DE gave up on balancing this Warframe as she was reworked 17 times and is still busted, and how the newer frames are suffering because of her. Oh yeah, it's a doozy. This moment right here is for the comment section. If I were to ask any of you who are watching to guess what is her strongest ability, would love to see what you write before we get into that topic. Saryn is a really old frame. She was released in March 18th, 2013, and I started in 2016. So when I finally got her, I was playing with a slightly altered Saryn. Saryn's abilities harnesses 3 out of the 4 toxin damage variants: base toxin, corrosive, and viral. But one of those 3 is her weakest, and we'll get to that. I did mention that Saryn was changed 17 times, and here is something from DE Pablo in the developers of Warframe AMA, which took place on April 20th of 2023. In that thread, DE Pablo gave an answer regarding Saryn's balance history. When asked, what frame gave you the most problems in terms of balance? Pablo replied, Saryn. We've had to rework her like 17 times, and she's still powerful after 17 times. I'm too scared to try an 18th time. This is from the big man himself.
Hello.
And if we go to the wiki and scroll through her patch history, you'll see it's a damn long one. This whole balancing issue stems from a lot of how the frame works, because she is a hybrid frame, an ability DPS, and a weapon platform. She used to be the OG Quick Exterminate frame before World on Fire Ember, low duration, and spam Miasma. These were the days when you would equip abilities as mods, by the way. So modding was so much tighter and less room, so you would have to min-max specific abilities. I mean, you still kind of do that today, but it's a bit different. But DE reworked her to make her more of a tactical frame with more presence in most missions. To understand how she's changed, let's take a look at how Saryn used to work around the time I started playing and compare it to how she is now, because it is quite different. So she has Spores, Molt, Toxic Lash, and Miasma. Spores back in those days used to spread viral spores instead of corrosive. She technically used to be a better panzer, but back then, viral used to half the enemy's health. Just like that, one proc, done and dusted. Now, it spreads corrosive procs that scale up and strip enemies' armor by 80% at 10 procs, and it deals corrosive damage over time. Spores also did not have a recast penalty that it has now, where you lose a percentage of your built-up spore damage if you were to recast it onto enemies. Basically, it was a spammable ability back then. The second ability, Molt, still somewhat functions the same, but back then, used to be able to cast spores on your Molt, and casting spores on your Molt lowered the energy consumption of spores. On top of that, attacking the spores on Molt would function like an enemy spreading spores. Depending on how you played, you could play defensive, camp in the corner, and attack your Molt infected with spores to spread the infection to enemies. And the best part is, there was no line of sight requirement. Yeah, DE did not like that playstyle, hence why it was changed. Because back then, the endurance strat was placing Saryn's Molt, spamming spores, and throwing down the Zenistar and have it tick damage over time like crazy. And for the more offensive playstyle, you would deploy your Molt infected with spores in front of enemies to divert the enemy fire and have the enemies attack the spored up Molt to spread spores on their own. They were pretty much killing themselves in the game. By the way, these were the days where enemies were more aggressive and lethal. But Molt at the moment is best used to divert enemy fire, giving you a small window of safety. It's insanely good as it is. Not only is it a cover for you, but boosts your movement speed and cleanses you of all current status effect ailments. And the best part is, it's an instant cast that has no animation lock. Do not underestimate it. And then the third ability, Toxic Lash, pretty much functions the same, but it was limited to only your melee weapon. It still coats your weapon with toxin damage to deal guaranteed toxin procs and insta-pops the spores without having to directly hit them. Oh yeah, there was a nice synergy. If you popped spores with an active Toxic Lash, you would refund 2 energy for each spore burst. Can we please have that back, DE, please? Just saying, it will be really nice. And lastly, Miasma does the same, where it's an AoE burst of damage that dazes enemies and deals more damage to them if they're infected with spores. But it used to deal corrosive damage instead of the current viral damage. This ability just became weaker over the years, to the point where it's just not optimal to run this over anything that will help you deal damage. This is in Steel Path, by the way. So that's pretty much the overall grand change to how Saryn used to be and how she is now. And looking at a Spore build done 9 to 10 years ago, like for example this Tactile Potato video right here, and this is the build he used back then when Saryn Prime launched, and it was built for spreading spores. I mean, the build is pretty much valid till to this day, and you'll probably just use the upgraded versions of said mods. So if we would have to look at an updated version of that said build in 2026, would use this kind of loadout. You can see it's pretty much using the same things, right? We got the strength, we got the duration, because he was using regular intensify, we have umbral intensify, simple things like that. And of course we have access to these big boy arcanes now. And we also have access to Helminth. Oh yeah, and of course Archon shards. Now for the question I asked earlier on what you guys thought her strongest ability was. If you answered anything other than Toxic Lash, well, you were wrong. Yes, Toxic Lash is her most powerful ability, and you can also see the different iterations of it among other frames. For example, Zaku's Xata's Whisper, and even Site 09's Resupply, but they're all weaker when compared to Lash. So Toxic Lash coats your weapons with toxin damage, giving you an additional instance of damage with every hit of your weapon. This also applies to multi-shots. Toxic Lash has two sources of scaling its damage, your weapon and ability strength. Toxic Lash adds an extra toxin attack that scales with weapon damage on hit before health and armor resistances. Toxin weapon coating provides you with not only a damage, but a guaranteed toxin proc, and the coding for this ability is both weapon and ability damage. So things like Archon Continuity will not affect it, but things like Roar will affect multiple instances of its damage, as Roar is coded as faction damage and an ability damage multiplier. Roar is going to significantly boost your overall damage with this ability, and it is her best in slot Helminth. What this means is that any faction modifiers applied to Toxic Lash will affect its initial damage, and after the initial application, faction damage will multiply Toxic Lash's hit a second time, and its toxin damage over time tick a third time, effectively triple dipping in damage. This toxin elemental damage does not combine with any of your modded elements. However, elemental damage mods equipped or applied to your weapon further boosts the damage of Toxic Lash, and any toxin damage mods will add the toxin mod multiplier to Toxic Lash's toxin ticks, regardless if they're combined with the other elements. So for example, if you have Venom Dose, the augment for the first ability to give you corrosive damage, and mod your weapon for viral, you will in turn have your weapon deal more damage to have Toxic Lash double its damage. And Toxic Lash propagates with most weapon effects. For example, when Acid Shells from Sobek explodes, it deals weapon damage, and because Toxic Lash is applied to your weapon, it integrates itself in the Acid Shell's explosion, causing the chain reaction of toxin damage. Also, back in the days when Xata's Whisper was introduced, people used to use Xata's Whisper and Toxic Lash to have it re-trigger each other. But after that balance change where it no longer does that, people pretty much thought it was dead. Even though Xata can't re-trigger Toxic Lash still applies itself to Xata's Whisper through AoE permeation effects and damage reflection. For example, you can do this with either Gas or the Nightwatch Napalm Ogress mod that leaves behind a fire patch, and this can re-trigger both Xata and Toxic Lash to then have damage reflection and redirection of the Void Bubble re-trigger Toxic Lash. Welcome to Warframe coding, where nothing makes sense. So if you have Toxic Lash and Xata active and shoot an enemy and proc the bubble, they can redirect Toxic Lash back to themselves. But it does look like Toxic Lash scaling will inherit the enemy's weapon damage instead of your own. Correct me if I'm wrong on this. And her Toxic Lash also applies to Incarnon modes for guns. By the way, this is an important thing, as I will get to it. And notice how I'm able to either run a Roar and Xata's Whisper on this frame. So DE's way of balancing the overpowered nature of abilities like Toxic Lash is playing it super safe and quietly nerfing their potential upon launch. What does this mean? Every new frame that has been released after the introduction of the Helminth and has an ability that gives you an elemental buff that kind of functions like Toxic Clash cannot subsume damage multiplier Helminths like Roar or Eclipse alongside their elemental buffs. For example, Zaku, Site 09, Temple, Oraxia, and Uriel. Granted, Zaku is a unique element unlike the other frames mentioned. Regardless, all of these frames' elemental damage buffs are, wait for it, this is a taboo word in Warframe, bugged, as some of them don't apply the full scaling or don't function properly in missions if you're not the host. I mean, I can't make this up. Just imagine if Site 09, aka Clyde, I call him Clyde, imagine if he could subsume Roar alongside his resupply, well, it would be chaos. And funny enough, he could be an insane competitor to Saryn. On top of that, Oraxia would just be a tankier Saryn 2.0. And all of these frames, with the exception of Zaku because he launched before them, cannot apply their elemental damage buffs to Incarnon guns when they're transformed. So the Incarnon Magazine takes priority over their elemental damage buffs, completely making them useless when they're used alongside an Incarnon. So this is why whenever someone asks, well, what's a good weapon to put on Saryn? My response is, bro, just close your eyes and pick whatever. Because she can literally make any weapon powerful. Nightmare, so you mean to tell me even the Stug? Listen. Go sit over there, please. Yeah, and don't come back. So guys, if you want to destroy the game with an insane weapon platform, Saryn is definitely your gal. And if you want to see this build that I'm using in the background footage, it's an old build that has been updated slightly. I might release it soon, who knows. Anyway folks, that has been it from me. I do hope you enjoyed and learned something from this video. And if you did, please feel free to leave a like, share, and subscribe for more Warframe content streams and so much more. Do it for the description. Thanks for watching, and as always, a peace. Bye-bye now.